Welcome back to the Media Club. So what can the BBC do to mollify Trump and defend its wider trust in journalism? Patrick, you said this week that the BBC should apologise for the edit, which they've sort of done in the letter to DCMS, to the committee, but not a lot else yet. Should they do anything else, or is that it?
No, they shouldn't do anything else other than apologise. They shouldn't pay that man a dime. And there are some people in the BBC who think they're very clever, and that they'll dress it up as a charity payment or will pay some fees. No, they shouldn't pay him. Legally, he's not entitled to anything. And I also think sort of morally and editorially, he's not inclined to, he's not entitled to anything. And just because he's been able to shake down a number of US networks, if the BBC were to bend the knee on this one, they would lose all of their trust and credibility at home and abroad, and they would lose their staff.
Trump is pretty good at shaking down media organisations in the US. We've seen payments from ABC and CBS. They've decided to be on the right side of him. Should the BBC?
It's true. I mean, there's quite a long history of legal action. I mean, I haven't crunched the numbers proportionately on how many have been successful, but certainly recently, as you say, ABC, CBS, just ahead of the Paramount takeover. It's well known that he's a litigious man, Donald Trump. I think in a lot of circumstances, and certainly in this case with the BBC, there's a lot of grandstanding to it. There's a lot of bluster. Is it a serious legal threat? I mean, I don't think so in this case.
But then you could say that the ABC one wasn't a serious legal threat. Pretty much everything everybody said was very easily defendable.
I think they're in a different situation. I mean, what US broadcasters do, I don't think it's a good idea for US broadcasters to be kowtowing or to be paying legal settlements with the president. But that is the US market, where they're far more vulnerable to regulation through the FCC, which is led by Brendan Carr, who is a Trump acolyte. The BBC is not regulated in the US. I mean, it has operations there, is trying to expand there, and I think that's a very interesting point. But fundamentally, it's a British broadcaster. It's regulated by Ofcom. And I agree, Pat, I think that that's not something that they should be getting into. I think an apology is definitely required. But you go down quite a slippery slope if you start making payments of whatever size to anyone who has an issue with your coverage, and I don't think they should do that.
But Pat, if you're a BBC journalist in America, those White House hard passes may not last very long.
Well, let's be honest, he is a bit of a baby and a bit of a bully. And if he can't sue them, he could do anything from taking away White House passes to declaring them enemies of the state and taking away their visas, to put in 10% tariffs on all British goods. I mean, the man could do anything, but that's another reason why you don't appease him, because he'll only come back for more.
So obviously this is the story that everyone's been talking about in the media this week and wider across the country and world. The BBC Director General and the Head of News resigning. James, was Tim right to go? Did he jump? Was he pushed?
Oh, where do we start with this? I mean, I think... leave aside whether he was right. I think from what we're starting to hear, it sounds as if there was a lot of his own decision making involved. It sounds as if he hadn't necessarily lost the backing of the board, but ultimately he decided that it just wasn't the position for him. He'd had enough. And let's be honest, it's a thankless task being BBC Director General. Really difficult. You're managing this massive organisation across news and entertainment in an incredibly fragmented world. You've got to be all things to all people in Britain. Meanwhile, you're having to justify, the value of a licence fee to British taxpayers. So
money's not great either.
No, that's also true. Well, I mean, relative to other organisations. I mean, let's be honest, he's not doing badly. Well, the Director General doesn't do badly, but you could easily have a much quieter, much more lucrative lifestyle elsewhere. But no, I think there's probably a combination of factors in terms of him leaving. I think when you have a news story like the one, or the news cycle like we've seen, where every day there is a new story, a new revelation, and it fills the media space, it's really difficult to come back from that. I think there's also questions, which maybe we'll get onto, but about the BBC's response or lack of response. So no, overall, I think it was probably the right decision, and there was probably a little bit of jumping as well as pushing. Yeah,
Pat, I mean, we're saying there that he didn't need to go. Why did he go then? Why did he choose now's the time? I mean, he's been through the washing machine already with
every DG
Glastonbury, all of those sorts of things.
Every DG goes through them. I do believe it would have been his own decision. I know Tim well enough to know that if he says it's his decision, you should take that at face value. I do feel that, and I still can't understand, if the news board was ready to make an apology 7 days earlier, why that apology didn't happen, who stopped it and why.
So this would be like the executives of the news division were happy to apologise.
News division board said we should apologise. They wrote an apology, but for some reason the board of the BBC wouldn't let them make it. Why they didn't let them make it and who was involved in stopping them from... I mean, the idea that Davie Turness, who's a significant and well-remunerated head of news, can't make an apology on behalf of her division and needs permission is bizarre. She then needs permission and it's not granted. And it's only not granted that then there's this week-long vacuum. And if there was clarity about governance and management in the BBC, it'd be easier to understand, but there isn't. So I don't know why she was blocked from making that apology, and that's something I hope the select committee will get to the bottom of. But then once they didn't make the apology, they all said, well, we're waiting for the comprehensive response to the committee. Well, I saw the response, and the response is pretty comprehensive, and it does address actually head-on most of the points within the so-called secret dossier, which wasn't a dossier and wasn't that secret. But why did that take 7 days to pull together? I chair a university in Cardiff, and we have to do everything bilingually, and it wouldn't take us 7 days to do that. So I do not understand why it took 7 days to issue the comprehensive response. And so they left a vacuum into which all of these other actors stepped. And I think probably at the end of the day, if they were demanding Deborah's, because I think they probably were demanding Deborah's head, and the apology isn't enough, there needs to be a head. And Deborah was, I imagine, disinclined to offer her head, and Tim may have said, if she goes, I go. And so that led to a week of, how do we get through this? And in the end, they both went. That's my guess. It is a guess. It is the sort of thing Tim would do. He does stand up for his execs. If he backs you, he backs you. But for an edit in a film that had no complaints at the time, was only discovered through the BBC's own editorial checks, to lose your DG and head of news is bizarre.
James, why that week-long gap? Just panic or something else?
That's the real question that I think people are trying to get to the bottom of now. There are issues, I think, in the governance of the BBC that we've discussed about the construction of the board and how easy it is to make decisions at that level. I think it was a fundamental issue, and I think it's hard to say whether, had they come out on the first day and said something then, apologised then, whether it all would have gone away. I think probably not, given there were many more stories to come out. But they could have got in front of it. They probably would have been able to control it a little bit better. In terms of what's gone on, there's been reports about a sort of boardroom saga, a rebellion. I find it quite difficult to believe. So this mainly centres around the role of Robbie Gibb, a BBC board member. So he previously worked for the BBC. He then went to work for Theresa May's government.
Yes. Has pretty strong views, which he's very been happy to talk about. He bought the Jewish Chronicle, I think, as well. So
founder of GB News.
Yeah.
And appointed by Boris Johnson to the BBC board.
So you're definitely right-wing flavoured.
Yes, I think no one would dispute that his political position. I don't think he would either. I guess my scepticism would be around the fact that he individually would be able to control the direction of the BBC board as one person on that board of 10, 12 people, a very seemingly competent chairman in Samir Shah, who you would have thought would be able to kind of exert his influence there.
But the pushback to that would be Samir Shah's new to the role. Robbie had done pretty well in getting into the news subcommittee, which had some staff members and advisors that were seemingly more of his ilk and that he appointed or got involvement with. So he was managing to potentially create... So BBC supporters say he has created a narrative in that BBC News Committee to constantly basically have this drumbeat to drive a view, which he's talked about publicly, about challenging the BBC's impartiality.
I mean, I think the other thing I would say to that is, in a lot of these situations, and I'd almost use the same argument to argue against the idea that there's institutional bias in the BBC. I think with a lot of these situations, the idea of some overarching conspiracy tends to be a little bit far-fetched, and the real world doesn't work like that. It's a lot messier, and people don't sit there scheming and coming up with grand plans. But I mean, another thing I'd say to that is we're now left in a situation where the entire structure of BBC's governance, including its board, is under quite intense scrutiny. There are calls from inside the BBC for Robbie Gibb to be removed from his position. If that were to happen, if this had been his scheme the whole time, then I think you could say it had backfired somewhat. So that's why I'm sceptical about that. I mean, having not been in the room myself, I could not tell you what those discussions, what was going on in those discussions. But
I don't believe it could be Gibb on his own.
Okay, so you said earlier that Tim Davie was the ultimate faithful. Is Robbie Gibb the ultimate traitor?
I haven't played that personality game actually, because I just don't believe that one man on his own can stymie a board. A board like that would always look, if it can, to achieve consensus. But on an issue of this importance, if there was just one board member digging in, I demand a head on the plate, I demand a head on the plate. As chair, a competent chair would deal with that. They'd put it to the vote, they'd close it down. Now, so I don't believe it could be Robbie on his own. But I don't understand how they got to the situation that they ended up with. I think it's very striking that Tim used the word weaponise in his farewell letter. He's a marketeer. He picks his words very carefully. That could have been his invitation to us to look at what's really going on at that level, because if there is a constant drumbeat of editorial challenge from a particular perspective, which, the incredible thing about Sameer's response was that everything, I mean, where the Telegraph were very clever was dropping a shoe every day. Today it's the Arabic service, tomorrow it's... The thing that the BBC response, which was comprehensive, and they did see the whole of the so-called dossier, responded to all of those points. And then you can get into an argument, was the response robust enough or whatever, but it was all there. And if that had come out on day one or day two, it would have taken the wind, along with an apology about the Trump edit, it would have taken the wind totally out of the sails of everything the Telegraph was then going to do. But that didn't happen. And that is a fundamental failure of governance. And so that sits at Sameer's door. And my concern is that this board, which is clearly riven, is now going to select the temporary DG and the new DG. So if we can't deal with the dysfunction before that happens, there's every possibility it's going to happen again.
Is the Telegraph an impartial player in this, or have they got an agenda as well? Your colleagues, it's a right of centre paper.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there has been this instinctive response that this is politically motivated. I think there are always going to be people who want to have a go at the BBC for whatever reason. I think with this story, I think where it's come from is the important thing. This was a dossier, or not a dossier, depending on what we're going to call it, a document drawn up by an advisor to their standards committee. I mean, that is exactly the kind of, or exactly the person, or one of the people that the BBC's leadership needs to be listening to. This is not people shouting from the sidelines, simply, trying to do the BBC down. This is people on the inside with genuine concerns. And I think on that basis, it's absolutely not just a story, but a very important story. And
can I challenge that just a little bit? Because he isn't on the inside. He was an advisor. He's actually a PR hack, runs a PR firm and has done 15 years. There's a very, very good piece by David Aronovich, which I think may have been in The Observer and is now on his Substack, about looking at the actual dossier. Because lots of people haven't seen the dossier, because one of the things about this world we live in is it's behind a paywall. So David actually went... It's now been published as part of the letter to the DCMS.
Right,
so it might be public if you go and find it. Yeah. David actually did a dissection of the dossier. The impartial dossier, first of all, somebody's revealed today, actually edited the bits of Trump's speech that it complained that the BBC edited. So it said the BBC went from here to here when the very next line was the following, and actually the very next line wasn't the following. The very next line was 4 lines of Trump talking about the need to fight and not having a country again. So he talks about the use of the expression reproductive rights in the BBC's American coverage as liberal leaning. He promotes a group called History Reclaimed, who are right out there in the culture wars territory of there's too much discussion, not enough praise for the empire and too much discussion about slavery. So he's not a neutral figure, and we shouldn't pretend that he was a neutral figure, and he didn't write a neutral report.
But he was appointed by them to advise for a number of years.
If we get into that sort of discussion, then who can we trust to make these judgments?
I have no problem with the BBC saying, look, we need to be challenged. I mean, maybe they should be challenged from the left as well as from the right. But we need to have people in who look at our output and challenge it, fair enough. But they shouldn't then pretend that they don't have their own biases. And that the idea, the Telegraph didn't look at the report and say, actually, if you look at the report, the use of the word lawfare, well, that's definitely a Trump talking point, which the author has used as it's just lingua franca. So the Telegraph didn't say, well, actually, when you look at the Prescott report, there are some things in here which are not, Telegraph took it at source. And look, the Telegraph is a right-leaning paper. And they didn't leak it to the Guardian, right? They leaked it to the Telegraph. So look, I take it for what it is. And, there's little to be gained from arguing about the semantics of the report now, it's pure, other than to say that this guy was not a neutral arbiter of truth.
So that advisor is Michael Prescott, and we haven't really heard from him yet, but I think we're going to hear him at a select committee soon. And of course, he is always welcome to come on the Media Club. So you talked earlier about the board appointing the next DG or an acting DG. Who would want to take this job, and who should take this job? Who do you think, James?
Well, I think there are probably a couple of ways of coming at it. The internal candidate might be, well, I say internal, that's not technically true, but Charlotte Moore, who left recently.
Went to Left Bank Pictures.
That's right. She was head of content. Very well respected figure. I think internally that there would be a lot of support for her. I think you could look to other figures in the industry, the likes of Jane Turton at All 3 Media, producer of The Traitors. She was, until very recently, linked with the Channel 4 chief executive role and now is no longer, which is interesting in itself. There are a handful of other figures. I mean, you could look, for example, at Alex Mahon, who was Channel 4 previously, although she's now gone into another job at Superstruck, the festivals company.
Not a sort of sexy broadcast job. It probably pays pretty well, but people saw that as a bit of a surprise move for her. Yeah,
I think so. And I think for all the reasons we've already discussed, you have to be someone with a really passionate love for public service broadcasting. It is a difficult job. It is a thankless job, and you really need that. I think the other way of looking at it is sort of looking at this saga and saying, well, there needs to be more sort of news chops at the head of the BBC, because news ultimately is what's brought down, I mean, most of the director general. So does it need more of an elevated position there? Which means Sir Trevor Phillips is a name who's been raised. James Harding. Obviously now taught us in The Observer, but previously
some people talked about his McTaggart lecture being a little bit of a pitch for the job.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. And then I suppose before I let other people put their opinions across, the other argument there is, well, does actually the role need to be split? Which I think is an interesting discussion, because with one Director General, you are overseeing everything. It's enormous business, this enormous taxpayer-funded business, but also commercial business, while also dealing with negotiations over future funding, the licence fee, that sort of thing. So should there be another role that's carved out that oversees editorial? That's an interesting question, I think, will be raised. You work with lots of bosses at your time there. Who'd be a good DG at this time?
Mark Thompson was DG, and he had Mark Byford as deputy DG. And Mark Byford, I think,
with more of a news background,
much more of a news background, and then Mark Thompson himself was a news background. And one of the interesting things about how TV has evolved is that if you go all the way back to John Burt, these were people who started in news and then moved across to television and then moved into senior management. Greg Dyke the same, Mark Thompson the same. Now TV and news are almost two parallel tracks. So it's very rare that you get a candidate who's got experience of both at any significant level. One person that has is Jay Hunt. Her name has been mentioned.
Previously at Channel 4.
Former editor of 6 O'Clock News, ran Channel 4, ran Channel 5, people forget that. And now a big job at Apple in Europe. There's Kevin Backhurst, former one of the heads within BBC News, Ofcom for a number of years, and now DG at RTE. I think a number of the other, I do think you need to have a Deputy Director General, and that person is probably either the Editor-in-Chief or who news reports into. And
that was sort of lost kind of for money reasons, wasn't it?
It was for money reasons and for delayering and all the rest of it. But I think, there's been a cost, because the DG job is enormous. You're running a $6 billion entity. And if you can create a structure where you have a Deputy Director General who's also Editor-in-Chief, it allows you to have a Director General who can have a much broader range of skills and experiences. And probably that's what the BBC will need going into this next era. Would
you recommend someone take the job?
Well, somebody's got to do it. So what I'd recommend is that myself and like-minded people will support them. Because I think those jobs are very lonely, actually. And I think they need to know that people of goodwill, and that isn't, that's on left and right. I think a lot of people see the value of the BBC, will support them.
Well, before all of this, you've been working on the British Broadcasting Challenge as a way to sort of raise some questions for the government as part of licence fee renewal. You've sort of launched it at the time this has all happened. Is it the best time to launch something or the worst time?
Yeah, we launched our document about renewing the BBC, a charter for the next period. We launched that about 2 weeks ago, and we're sitting there going, how are we going to get people to notice this? What are we going to do to make this current and real? And then this happened, and in some ways I wish it wasn't. The document itself wasn't so current. But fundamentally, we're at a very particular moment as we look at this charter renewal. The 6 richest men in the world own pretty much all of the platforms that we use to find, share, discover content. Elon Musk owns X, Twitter. Larry Ellison owns CBS and will be on the board of TikTok USA, and Oracle will be its data partner. Mark Zuckerberg owns or controls Facebook, Instagram and WhatsApp. Jeff Bezos owns Amazon, Amazon Prime, Amazon Web Services, which the BBC iPlayer sits on, and the Washington Post. Then you've got Sergey Brin and Larry Page, and between them they own YouTube, or own or control YouTube and Google. So all of the big platforms through which content is disseminated, shared, discovered, are owned by 6 American individuals, some of whom are MAGA, some of whom Zuckerberg, when Trump was elected, got rid of all moderation, for example, all content moderation. And Bezos reportedly paid $30 million to do a documentary on Melania Trump. So the BBC is the only bulwark that we have that stands against all of that, because they're also consolidating into more traditional media. Ellison has bought CBS. He's now trying to buy CNN.
Warner Brothers Discovery that owns CNN.
CNN. Yep. So there's a consolidation happening on the other side of the pond, which is going to force and remake news content, how it's made, how it's shared, who can access it. The BBC stands apart from that as a publicly owned public service broadcaster at scale. And the at scale bit is also important, because all the surveys show that even today, nearly 80% of people engage with the BBC at least once a week. Still the most trusted news provider in the UK, second most trusted news provider in the USA after the Weather Channel. So we need a strong BBC, and this charter is a chance to do that. Our proposals were make the BBC, first of all, give the BBC a forever charter. The idea that every 10 years there's even a discussion about should the BBC continue or not is really mad. We don't do that with the NHS and other public, national institutions. So give the BBC a forever charter and instead spend time on a 10-year licensing agreement about what the BBC will do, what services it will provide, and what audiences it will speak to. Make fully independent the appointments process for people to the board of the BBC. So have an independent appointments process, just like we do with public service appointments. The parliamentary approval, the approval by the people to come through DCMS Select Committee, not the executive, so that you insulate the BBC from the executive. At the moment, it's too close to the executive. Nisa Nandi and the Prime Minister puts people on the board of the BBC. Well, that's got to stop if you want to protect the BBC for the long term. We believe it should be funded at scale. We don't have the intellectual firepower to work out what the funding mechanism should be, but it needs to retain the universal principle. It needs to be a universal broadcaster. It also needs to take on an obligation for dealing with mis and disinformation. So that was our potpourri of things that the BBC need to do going forward. And we were sitting there thinking, how are we going to tell people about it? And boom, this happens. And many of the issues we talked about writ large in this mess that we have now.
James, do you think any government would give it true independence?
It's always a difficult one, isn't it? And we see that in so many different media organisations and trying to kind of split up ownership from editorial control and these sort of firewalls that get put in place, but can be got around, and things can be good on paper but harder in practice. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see kind of how that works, how that would work in practice. I agree with the principle, absolutely. Kind of keeping the BBC away from political interference, I think, can only be a good thing. I think in terms of sort of guaranteeing the long-term future of the BBC, which I agree is a very important thing, I think there's a risk that it becomes something of a sort of charity case almost, and that defenders of the BBC sort of get themselves into this situation where it is constantly sort of this defensive mindset of a bunker mentality of kind of like, oh no, well, this is why the BBC is good. And I think the BBC needs to be able to prove to people, to show to people why it is good and why it is worth paying for. And I think trust is basically at the heart of that. I think the BBC does great things in terms of its news coverage, but if it loses public trust,
and it's still one of the most trusted organisations.
It is. That's absolutely true. It's still tops the rankings, but it's it's losing that. I mean, you can see it diminishing.
But is that partly because in a modern media environment, digital media environment, the people who think it's dreadful are unreachable? They sit in an ecosystem which, even with the BBC's sort of firepower and evidence of the impartiality that pretty much is across all programming, they can't communicate that.
I think that's definitely to do with it, the sort of atomization that we've seen that makes things so much more difficult and is actually a major driving force of why the BBC is struggling financially as well at the moment. But I think, and look, I don't have the answers on sort of how you fix it for BBC. If I did, I'd be going for that DG job myself. But I think there needs to be the
young man
throwing your hat in the ring. That's it for sure.
But no, I just think that it needs to be a sort of positive, proactive campaign that proves the worth of the BBC and does not inadvertently perhaps put it in this position that it thinks, well, we need to prop up this organisation because it can't sort of wash its own face. And that's a situation I don't think we want to get into.
I understand that. I think the challenge of the 10-year charter is it forces people into first of all, we got to keep it, and then we can talk about what we're going to do with it. If we knew we were going to keep it, we could all talk about how it can be better. But it starts with I think one of the newspapers today said, will the BBC survive to the next charter? The idea that that's even a question, and it wasn't written rhetorically, the person who wrote it actually thought that. But no, you're right. And we don't want the BBC also being sort of special measures TV. We don't want the BBC doing the stuff that nobody else wants to do. We also don't want the BBC to be like PBS in America. When I worked in America running a cable network, I remember the first telethon I saw on PBS wasn't to raise money for children in need. It was to raise money for PBS so it could stay on air. And I thought, God, you're the most advanced democracy in the world. And this is what public broadcasting looks like. So we have something really special here. And yet occasionally it cocks up, and sometimes it cocks up really badly, and it needs to get better at identifying the mistakes, apologising for the mistakes, and not just apologising, making good and showing that they've learned. But we lose a lot if the BBC is diminished, because none of those tech bros give a monkeys about what's going on over here. I mean, Elon Musk called for Keir Starmer to be overthrown at the next election, said there's going to be a civil war, and is paying Tommy Robinson's legal fees. You know, and he probably has the most active, widely distributed media platform in the world. If that's what we want to succumb to, then we're all going to be diminished.
Okay, just before the break, in any normal week, this would be the top story. Sky is eyeing up buying ITV's broadcast arm. That's the channel's ITVX, basically the ad-funded part of the business. James, on Monday, ITV said that they expect its ad revenue this Christmas to be significantly down. The next day, this news breaks. So why does Sky want it?
Well, that's an interesting question. And just to take a step back, I mean, the breakup of, or potential breakup of ITV has been on the cards for a while now. And ITV Studios, its production division, has been seen as sort of, you know, the bright star. That's what people want.
I mean, you can kind of look at the PLC side, and basically all of the value could be attributed to the studios business, and the broadcast business has sort of been valued at zero.
Well, yeah, almost. I mean, I think that's certainly true that the growth area is ITV Studios. I mean, broadcasting and traditional advertising does still throw off quite a lot of cash, but it's a declining business, and the growth of streaming is not yet offsetting this. So the question for the last 18 months, 2 years has been, well, we know people are interested in ITV Studios, but who's going to want the rest of it? Sky is apparently the answer. And yeah, I think the idea there is to create a sort of UK streaming champion is how I've heard it described. So bringing in ITVX's not insignificant user base into Sky, you gain scale, which in this media environment is so important when you're playing against these major US companies. And then you essentially use ITV as what in industry is described as a shop window. So you can put Sky programming onto ITV, onto the free-to-air bit, and then hopefully drive people into the paid subscription part of Sky's business. And people...
So ITV becomes a sort of Skylight.
In a way, I suppose, and they're keen to point out that, you know, that doesn't mean that they're going to put I'm a Celebrity behind a paywall or anything like that. But yeah, it's sort of, it's the way of luring people in, I suppose. And sport is one area they point to. I mean, everyone knows Sky sport is of huge significance to Sky, but ITV have the Euros, Six Nations rugby. So I think people see that as a potential area of overlap. So
I mean, Sky have found that a lot of the people who are their content providers that have done very well for them over the years in movies, in telly, a lot of those are launching streaming services themselves. So things like HBO and HBO Max coming to the UK. You know, historically, that was all on Sky. You know, is this part of them trying to think, how do we develop our business?
I think so. I mean, there was a period in which Sky were really positioning themselves as this sort of aggregator, where the idea was that, you know, you'd have your subscription to Netflix, you'd have your Amazon Prime, Disney, whatever it was, but Sky would be sort of the home, and you go through their app and access those different things. And I mean, I wouldn't sit here and say that that's failed, but I think it hasn't quite worked out as the business, a sort of sustainable business model for them. So I think they're now, looking at new ways to kind of reach and retain audiences. And I think, the idea of a major UK commercial streaming player is one that's quite appealing. But
owned by a US company.
Owned by a US company.
Interestingly, Pat, when I thought about this, the Murdoch owned Sky taking over ITV, and that was an option a few years ago when sort of Virgin Media took over the cable networks. Industry aghast. Quite a lot of the commentary I saw about this was like, oh yeah, maybe it needs it, sort of a bit resigned to this is perhaps where ITV should live. Should ITV be a part of Sky?
Let me declare an adjacent interest. I used to serve on the board of ITV Studios as a non-exec until a year ago. I've got no inside information about any of this stuff going on, but what I will say is that ITV the ITV broadcast arm and ITV PLC, led by Carolyn McCall, is a very well-run company. They know what business they're in. They do it very well. And it looks like they've driven, if the number in the papers is the number that the negotiations around, it looks like they've driven, they're involved in a very productive conversation. I think we would maybe do better to talk about this as Comcast rather than Sky, and where it fits in the Comcast ecosystem.
So Comcast own NBC in America, which is not dissimilar to the sort of ITV business.
Yeah, they own NBC, a free-to-air network in America.
Peacock.
They have Peacock, which is a sub-scale streaming platform. But you start to pull together Sky, Peacock, ITVX. You start to get some scale as a streaming product. It's true, free-to-air audiences are diminishing, but ITV still has the biggest free-to-air audiences. They probably delivered, I think, 90 out of the top 100 audience events last year. If you're launching a product still, and it's day, date, time sensitive, ITV is sort of the place that you go to. And that has heft. You can cross-promote from your other platforms to ITV. When we get to IPTV and everything's delivered through the web, then what Sky can do there in terms of interfaces and prominence for ITV, they'll have to give prominence to everybody. But the ease at which ITV and Sky, will you even know you're moving between them maybe at times? So I can see why Comcast would want to do it. It would make sense globally. Those big entities are buying free-to-air networks. I can see why ITV would be interested in using it as a mechanism to get to scale. I know there are concerns about advertising.
So it would be probably 60-70% of the TV advertising market, though I'm sure they would argue that market is very broad now. Also, news provision is interesting. Comcast gave a commitment to Sky News for a certain number of years, which another 2 or 3 years left on.
But it'd be an interesting question about what would happen to ITN.
Yeah, so ITN is owned 40% by ITV.
Yeah.
So not wholly owned, but they are the driving force of
also
that.
It's Channel 4 News, and they provide Channel 4 News, Channel 5 News, ITV News, and Sky News. Then they be,
But But in these arguments we're talking about, do you need a scaled provider? Are they a good competitive scale provider for the BBC?
Well, they would be. The only question would be, will there be enough diversity of voice within and merged? Yeah, because News on 4 and ITV are very different in tone and take. And 5 do their news in a totally different way as well. So these are things that people are going to have to work through. The other thing, from a producer point of view, there will be fewer buyers in the marketplace. And I think producers are worried, independent producers are worried, that there'll just be fewer people that you can sell to.
James, do you think the government would wave through a deal?
I think on media plurality, I'm not sure where that would fall. I think there would have to be sort of commitments, and that's closely regulated market. I think the big issue would be with the CMA, the Competition Markets Authority, around, as we said, TV advertising. And would they say, right, we're going to redefine it and say, well, we're not just going to look at TV ads, we're going to look at you as a competitor to Google and Meta, and in that situation, they're minnows, to be quite frank. The government's been making the right noises. It's already said that it's sort of open to relaxing those rules. I think it was over the summer. So I think there would be, optimism and confidence that would get through on competition grounds. I think that's not to say there wouldn't be some backlash. I think Channel 4 would be the big sticking point. If we look at it from an ad sales perspective, ITV have the biggest ad sales house in the UK. That's followed by Sky. So together, as you said, I think it'd be 69% of the market. Channel 4 are in third place, and that would leave them sort of high and dry. Yeah. So would they push for concessions? Sky giving up some business, so Sky doesn't just sell its own ads; it sells ads for the likes of Warner Brothers and Paramount. Would it have to give those up? I think that's a question. Is that a big enough barrier to stop a deal? I think probably not.
Well, the government probably want to support Channel 4, the broadcaster that they also own.
Well, yeah, there's that element to it as well, yeah.
Okay, when we return, YouTube and Disney are at loggerheads. See you in a sec.
Hello, Media Club listeners. Patrick here from Podcast Discovery, the podcast marketing company, where this week we've been thinking about the future. I'm coming to you from the Savoy, where we've spent the day cooking up exciting new ideas for podcast promotion. Keen to find out what they are? Speak to us at podcastdiscovery.com. That's podcastdiscovery.com.
We've talked about BBC Studios and ITV Studios, now Podshop Studios, where we'd make our show every week, thanks to our supporters here at Podshop, and somewhere that you can record your podcast or your live stream as well. They've just opened up 4 brand new studios in Shoreditch. Each one has its own distinct look and feel. We're back in the library this week. If you haven't seen it, go on YouTube and have a look. And I can just see on those library shelves 17 volumes of How to Fix the BBC. They're all professionally designed and fully equipped for broadcast quality video recording. Check it out at podshoponline.co.uk, where they're offering 25% off your first booking for Media Club viewers and listeners. So head to their website, Podshop Online, and use the code Media Club for 25% off. Welcome back. Here's some stories we've been talking about in the club this week. With over 11 million people watching the Celebrity Traitors final live on Thursday, it was inevitable that the BBC would renew the show, which is what they revealed on Monday this week. Not that anyone was paying that much attention. Rumours that Sir Robbie Gibb will be lined up have so far been unconfirmed.
Big dog.
Netflix is looking to commission original video podcasts to support wider deals with Spotify. Bloomberg reports that the streamer has been reaching out to talent agencies about exclusive deals that once again will shut out YouTube. And speaking of YouTube, the platform's TV app has been stripped of Disney brands since the end of October, as the companies argue over carriage fees for ESPN and ABC. American football fans have already missed 2 big games since the dispute began. Who's going to hold out the longest? Remember, you can get all of the details of those stories on our free Substack. Head to themediaclub.com to sign up, and you also get our free Briefs newsletter on a Monday morning, which reviews all of the topics that all of the other media podcasts, apparently there are some, have been talking about in the past week as well. Go sign up for free at themediaclub.com. Before we get to the quiz, just a quick one on YouTube. You obviously were in America negotiating cable deals and carriage deals. This one seems quite different. Like YouTube, you have YouTube TV in America. It's like a cable network. It's the fastest growing one. Disney, though, have got their own Hulu Plus TV. I think it's sort of a similar thing. They always say these carriage disputes, this is a big change, and they always do a deal. Are they going to do a deal?
I don't know. I've been in a carriage dispute when I was at Discovery. They're not pleasant on either side, because as a network, you see your money, your ad income drifting away, and people start trying other things. So when you come back, you lost your audience. Reading the statements from Disney, they put out a statement to all of their staff. They basically said that YouTube were offering terms which are below the current deal and below the market, and that YouTube were trying to push it all in the way of their model. YouTube respond and say that basically ABC, Disney are living in a past era, and the world has changed, and it's time for them to catch up and change with it. They're dug in. ABC is pushing people to ESPN Plus, which is their new streaming product, and also Fubo. I think they're pushing.
They've acquired the sort of competitor sort of sport product.
So ABC are pushing, and they could also push into ABC free to air. So ABC are pushing people to the platforms that they own, and at the moment, no one seems to be blinking.
You get a lot of these carriage disputes, don't you? I think this is a particularly interesting one because of what it says about the power dynamics in the market, and YouTube coming in and saying, well, we're a player now. They've got, I think, 10 million subscribers.
And growing fast.
And they're growing fast. They're going to forecast to overtake some of the established players. So I think they're maybe trying to set down the gauntlet a little bit and say,
they're trying to change the game. You've had us cheap up until now. Now you start paying.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. Right, it's just enough time for the Audio Network Media Quiz. Strap in, let's see how much attention our guests have been paying to the other media news this week. And the game, well, the quiz is, it's called TikTok News. So 3 media stories connected by one theme and then shoehorned into the format of an existing media property. This time we're looking at 3 developments concerning TikTok, but I will convey the stories using the medium of TikTok itself.
Okay.
You just translate into something that 35-plussers will understand, who are the listeners to this. And once again, Alex Audio Network has taken that brief from producer Matt and created a playlist of TikTok-inspired music to score today's game. It is a best of 3, so buzz in with your names if you know the story. So Pat, you will say...
Pat.
And James will say,
James.
Let's play TikTok news. Okay, I'm looking at a split screen. In the bottom half, I can see some Minecraft gameplay. But in the top, it's Ant McPartlin laughing, then Deck, and now they're on a British Airways flight for some reason.
James.
Yes.
Is this a deal between ITV and TikTok for advertising? So this is a partnership that will see ads run alongside official ITV clips on TikTok. And I guess, you know, the sell to brands is that this is a safe environment on the platform, and for ITV it's a good way to sort of monetize the audiences there, which is obviously quite difficult.
Sort of similar to their YouTube deal, it sounds like. Yeah. Okay. TikTok news story number 2. I'm seeing an ordinary looking bedroom. A teenager is performing a cover of a song I should know. It's had like 50 billion views or something. TikTok, music. Pat, yes.
This isn't the deal that they've done with Heart or
iHeart. Yes, it is.
To combine iHeart's sort of radio platform with a number of TikTok creators to create some sort of is it 25?
Yes, that's pretty good. They're making 25 podcasts
and
with their creators.
Them at their events, and this is a parallel. I don't even have TikTok on my phone because I accepted the Chinese interference argument. So this is like a parallel universe to me. But I'm sure my 12-year-old could tell me.
And they're also going to launch some TikTok radio stations as well. Some of which actually exist in some other countries around the world. Linear, everyone loves TikTok linear after all, even TikTok. Okay, one more to go. Right, it's someone doing their makeup. I'm literally getting ready with them. Oh, but she's also talking about a murder. There's a mirror on the desk, but it's not a normal desk. It's a true crime desk.
James.
Yes.
So this is, I think, the Daily Mail talking about putting true crime at the front of their sort of audio output. I think they've renamed, I can't remember what to now, but they've renamed their TikTok account. And they're also putting it sort of front and centre for podcasts, which...
It's called The Crime Desk.
That's it, The Crime Desk.
It's got some podcasts in there. And obviously The Mail, big fans of crime.
Well, that's and have always been. I mean, you know, it was ever thus, crime selling newspapers. But more recently, I mean, the Daily Mail did the Lucy Letby series, which was really popular. They're trying to drive more people to their subscription service. It makes sense. Everyone loves true crime.
Well, James, congratulations. First time luck, obviously. You've won the quiz, and as a special prize, you get to create an independent body that looks at the Media Club to decide whether it's been truly impartial each week. So you come back with reports.
I can give you some advice
on that. Also, thank you to Alex at Audio Network for scoring today's quiz. Remember, Alex and Audio Network can do that for you. Just head to audionetwork.com. Before we go, how can people keep up with your good work? How can they find out about the British Broadcasting Challenge?
BritishBroadcastingChallenge.com. I also do some stuff for the British Broadcasting Challenge on my own Substack, which is Pat Young on the Substack platform. And we're involved at the moment in creating letters for members of the public to send to MPs to raise their concerns about the future of the BBC.
So keep an eye on the website. And James, how can people find your good work?
Well, they can go into the pages of the Telegraph. That'd be the main place. If not, I am still on Twitter/X, so you can follow me there.
Excellent. And thank you for listening and watching too. My name is Matt Deegan. The producer was Matt Hill. It was a Rethink audio production with video support from Podcast Discovery. I'll see you next week.